Okay, just picture this for a second. After years and years of intense negotiations to finally end a long, bitter conflict, a historic peace deal is on the table. The signing ceremony is all set up, the VIPs are in their seats, and then, at the very last minute, the country's own Supreme Court steps in and just stops the whole thing cold. Today, we are digging into exactly how and why a landmark peace agreement was shut down for being unconstitutional.
All right, let's get into it. Here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at that dramatic moment the deal was stopped. Then, we're going to unpack what was actually in this controversial agreement. We'll see who stood up to challenge it, break down the two big reasons the court gave for its decision, and finally, we'll zoom out and look at this huge clash between the need for peace and the rule of law.
So, let's set the scene. It's August 5th, 2008. We're in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. You've got representatives from the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and they are about to sign this thing called the Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain, the MOAAD. I mean, this was supposed to be the culmination of a long, really difficult peace process. But the signing never actually happened.
What is just astounding here is how fast it all fell apart. I mean, the road to this agreement started way back in 2001 with the Tripoli Agreement. That set the stage. But then, flash forward to August 4th, 2008. Literally, one day before the big signing, the Supreme Court drops a temporary restraining order. Why? Because some local governments filed a challenge. And just like that, the very next day, the ceremony was dead in the water.
So that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? What on earth was written in this agreement that was so explosive, so controversial, that it forced the highest court in the land to step in and pull the emergency brake? Well, let's find out.
At the very heart of this whole deal was the creation of something brand new, the Bangsamoro Juridical Entity, or BJE. And to really get what the BJE was, you first have to understand who it was for.
The deal started with this really broad definition of the Bangsamoro people. Now look at this. It's not just about one ethnic or religious group. It's about all the original inhabitants and their descendants. The idea was to create this new, unified political identity. And that right there, that foundational step, turned out to be incredibly controversial.
And this just shows you the sheer scale of what they were trying to do. The BGU wasn't just going to be a government for some piece of land. No, its proposed authority covered the land, the sea, and the air over this huge region. We're talking about an immense amount of territory.
And here's where it gets really crucial. The powers they wanted to give the BJE were, well, extraordinary. It could build its own institutions, create its own police force, set up a separate judicial system, and get this, it could even enter into trade deals with foreign countries. It could even cancel resource licenses that the central government had already issued. I mean, these are powers that look a whole lot like the powers of an independent country.
Now, to describe how the BGE would relate to the central government, the agreement used a very specific and very important word, associative. This isn't a word you just find lying around in domestic law. It's a term from international law, used to describe relationships between two separate states, like the one between the United States and the Marshall Islands. That choice of word was a massive deal.
Okay, this chart really puts it all into perspective. On one side, you have the existing autonomous region, the ARMM. It's a region within the Republic, and its powers come directly from the Constitution. But the proposed BJE, that was framed as an associative partner, sharing authority with the central government. And it would have powers like foreign trade that went way beyond local government and would absolutely require changing the country's constitution.
So with a proposal this radical on the table, you have to ask who was going to challenge it. Well, the opposition didn't come from some think tank in the capital. It came directly from the cities and provinces whose entire futures were about to be rewritten.
You know, this legal fight wasn't some abstract debate. It was led by the very local governments on the ground, the ones whose territory was at stake. Leaders from North COTABATO, Zamboanga City, and others, they're the ones who took this to the Supreme Court. They argued that this deal would completely change their communities, and it was all being done without even asking them.
And this quote right here, this gets to the absolute core of their first big argument. They said the whole process was done in secret. A deal this massive, something that would affect everyone, was cooked up behind closed doors. They argued that the government literally violated a constitutional right to information by not talking to the communities that would be impacted the most.
So this all lands in the lap of the Supreme Court. And when the court finally ruled, it wasn't even close. They struck down the MOAAD, pointing to two huge fatal flaws. One was about the process, how the deal was made, and the other was about the substance, what was actually in it.
First up, the court said the way the government negotiated this whole thing was, plain and simple, a violation of the law.
Yeah, the Supreme Court basically laid out the receipts. It wasn't just that the government forgot to consult the public. They actively violated multiple laws that were already on the books. You have Executive Order Number 3, which demands community consultation and peace talks. You have the Local Government Code, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. All of them require consultation. The court called the secret negotiations a grave abuse of discretion.
But the second violation, that was even more fundamental. This wasn't about how the deal was made, but what the deal actually said. This quote from the court's decision, right here, this is the smoking gun. Buried in the MOA AD was a line that the court said was basically a guarantee from the president's team that they would amend the Constitution to make the deal work. And the court said, no way. The executive branch has zero power to promise something like that. Only Congress or the people themselves can change the Constitution.
So, at the end of the day, the court found that this associative relationship, combined with all those state-like powers for the BJE, created something totally alien to the 1987 Constitution. The Constitution allows for autonomous regions, sure, but not for creating what is essentially a state within a state. They were trying to build something the legal blueprint just didn't have room for. So, where does all this leave us? I mean, what's the big lesson from this incredible legal drama? Well, it really shines a spotlight on this deep tension that exists in any democracy that's trying to heal itself from internal conflict.
Think about it. On one hand, you have this urgent political need to achieve peace, and that often requires being creative, flexible, thinking outside the box. But on the other hand, you have the rule of law. You have this absolute legal necessity to follow the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. The court's decision wasn't saying peace isn't important. It was saying that the search for peace can't just ignore the country's own legal foundations.
And that really underscores the main takeaway here. How you get there is just as important as where you're going. A peace deal that's built on a shaky legal foundation, one that's negotiated in secret and makes promises it can't keep, it's just not built to last. The court sent a really clear message. For peace to be real and lasting, the process itself has to be legitimate.
And that leaves us with this final, really tough question. The Supreme Court even said that the president can propose constitutional changes for peace, but they can't guarantee them. And so this whole case forces us to ask, how does a society pull off that delicate dance of reinventing itself for peace while also staying true to the very laws and structures that define it? It's a huge challenge, and it's just as relevant today as it was back in 2008.